Welcome to the Hindu Daily. Imagine, digging irrigation ditches in the blazing sun for 10 hours, only to find out the government has legally frozen your wages.
Right, so you're actually making less than the farmhand working the private field right next to you.
Exactly. It's a
Ever.
harsh reality. Today we're going on a deep dive into a crucial, but honestly largely ignored debate about rural employment acts in India.
Yeah, we're looking at the tension between the established MGNREGA program and the new Viksit Bharat guarantee for Rozgar and Ajivika mission.
Or the VBG-Ramji Act, for short. Because the core issue buried in the fine print there is just severe wage suppression.
It really is. It's the silent engine dictating whether these poverty alleviation programs actually work for you, the citizen, or if they just look good on paper.
I mean, to understand why this is happening, we have to look at the mechanics, right? Like when MGNREGA first launched back in 2006, the central government didn't actually set the wages.
Right. Under Section 6.2 of the Act, state-specific minimum wages applied. So for many states, this meant agricultural laborers were getting paid higher than the standard market wage.
Which created massive enthusiasm and real economic uplift. But, well, that didn't last. The center then stepped in using Section 6.1.
Yeah, which gave them the power to dictate those wages from the top down. And the data shows that since 2009, they've effectively frozen those wages in real terms.
They adjust for inflation on paper, sure.
Yeah.
But they never actually increased the workers' purchasing power.
Exactly. So by this 2025-26 financial year, MGNREGA wages are just drastically lower than the mandated state minimum wages.
It's like being promised a financial safety net, but finding out the net is tied up with bureaucratic red tape and suspended below the actual floor of the economy.
That is a perfect way to put it. And the gap between what the government pays and the open market is just widening. Plus, in the open market, you get paid in cash at the end of the day.
Right. But MGNREGA payments are plagued by severe delays right now, mostly because of technical failures in the Aadhaar-based payment system.
Yeah, the tech glitches are a huge problem.
Wait, explain that mechanism for a second.
Yeah.
How does a tech glitch stop a day laborer from buying dinner?
Well, imagine a worker finishes their guaranteed labor. The payment system requires exact biometric and demographic matching. If a fingerprint doesn't match a dusty scanner in a remote village, or there's a minor spelling error in the Aadhaar database.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the system just rejects the payment. They did the work, but the computer says they didn't. This creates a severe discouragement effect, and workers just walk away.
And when legitimate workers leave, it creates a vacuum for local corruption and, fake ghost worker leakages to thrive.
But hold on, I need to wrap my head around the new legislation then.
Sure, the VBG-Ramji Act.
Right. Wait, if the new VBG-Ramji Act shares the financial costs 60.40 with the states, meaning the states are now paying a huge chunk of the bill, why does the center still dictate the wage rate? Doesn't that completely defeat the original logic of Section 6.1? It's a fascinating and glaring contradiction, honestly. The whole historical justification for the center setting the wage was entirely because they were footing the whole bill.
Right.
So now that states are legally obligated to pay 40%, the logical step would be to return to state minimum wages under Section 6.2. But instead, the center retained the power to set wages and dropped the minimum wage guarantee entirely.
Wow. So this central control over local labor markets creates an undeniable structural tension between the center and the states.
Oh, absolutely. It's a classic struggle over who holds the reins of power.
And we see this exact same tension, central authority versus local autonomy, playing out in a completely different arena too, our internal security architecture.
Yes, the new Central Armed Police Forces, or CAPF, General Administration Bill of 2026, this is a major structural shift.
Because the CAPFs include massive organizations like the CRPF and the Border Security Force, right?
Exactly. And this new bill mandates that a highly significant portion of their top leadership roles must be filled by Indian Police Service, or IPS, officers brought in on deputation.
We're talking about reserving 50% of Inspector General posts, 67% of additional Director Generals, and literally all of the top Special Director General and Director General roles exclusively for the IPS.
All of them, yeah.
So if you are a career officer who has spent decades climbing the ranks within the Border Security Force, the absolute top jobs are legally walled off from you. It's like a debate between corporate parachuting versus necessary cross-pollination.
That's the tension, exactly. The cadre officers within the CAPFs obviously want those promotions, but the government argues that parachuting in IPS officers is essential.
Right. They cite Sardar Patel's historical vision of the IPS as a unifying link, The logic is that because state police forces are led by IPS officers, having them lead the central forces ensures smooth national coordination.
That's the official stance, yeah.
But wait, didn't the Supreme Court just weigh in on this? In May 2025, in the Sanjay Prakash case, the court explicitly ordered a progressive reduction in these deputations. How can the legislature just pass a bill to override a Supreme Court directive? Isn't the court the final word?
Well, that is the absolute crux of the constitutional debate here. It raises a fundamental question about the separation of powers.
How so?
Because the judiciary's role is to interpret the law as it exists, not to make executive policy. The government's stance is that deciding the leadership structure of a national security force is strictly an executive policy decision.
Ah, I see.
So by codifying this deputation quota into the 2026 bill, the legislature isn't technically ignoring the court. They are establishing a new, clear statutory framework that removes the legal ambiguity the court was ruling on in the first place.
So they are legally redefining the architecture of internal security. It's fascinating how much political energy goes into debating who controls our internal security forces, especially when you realize how dangerously vulnerable our foundational building blocks are from the outside.
Oh, definitely. If you look at our national supply chains, the illusion of complete sovereignty really starts to crack.
The vulnerability is staggering when you look at the raw data. I mean, India currently imports about 85% of its crude oil and over 50% of its natural gas.
Which means global geopolitical shocks, things happening oceans away, hit your wallet almost instantly.
Right. To put it in perspective, if the global price of crude oil goes up by just $10 a barrel, it adds an extra $13 to $14 billion to India's national import bill. And it spikes consumer inflation by 30 to 40 basis points.
Massive.
It's like building a state-of-the-art smart home, but relying entirely on your neighbor for the electricity and water. If they get mad and turn off the tap, your whole highly advanced system goes dark.
That's exactly it. And it's not just energy keeping the lights on, it's the food on your table. We currently produce barely 44% of the edible oils we demand domestically.
Yeah, we rely heavily on imports for pulses and even the fertilizers needed to grow our own crops.
And look at pharmaceuticals. India is famously known as the pharmacy of the world, right? But 65 to 70% of our active pharmaceutical ingredients, the APIs, come directly from China.
The actual chemicals that make the medicine work.
Exactly. To use industry terms, we completely dominate the downstream, like the final assembly, pill pressing, and packaging. But we are highly exposed in the upstream and midstream. If API supply stops, our generic drug industry just halts.
Wow. So the proposed solutions require a massive, capital-intensive pivot, right? Investing heavily in renewable energy storage, the National Green Hydrogen Mission.
And most importantly, deepening the domestic manufacturing of those critical intermediate components.
But I have to push back here. We hear constantly about India becoming a global manufacturing hub. But if we are essentially just assembling final products using imported parts, are we really building economic resilience?
Well, that is the illusion of resilience. True resilience requires building internal capacity from the ground up. You can't just operate the final assembly line. You have to own and manufacture the foundational building blocks.
And building capacity isn't just about constructing physical factories or securing oil reserves. True national capacity is built on human capital.
Which brings us to a massive systemic deficit hiding in plain sight within West Bengal's higher education system.
Yeah, the recent All India survey on higher education revealed that West Bengal relies incredibly heavily on temporary teachers. We're talking consistently over 15%, recently hitting 18%.
Which translates to over 13,200 temporary teachers, basically holding the whole system together.
And what's crucial to understand here is the demographic breakdown. This precarious, gig-style employment disproportionately affects women.
Yes. Currently, 22.5% of all female teachers in the state's higher education system are on temporary contracts, compared to just 15.4% for men.
Now, when you see numbers like that, the immediate assumption is usually that the state government instituted a hiring freeze or that student enrollment just skyrocketed too fast to keep up.
Right, but when you actually dig into the data, it completely debunks those myths.
It really does. Because permanent hiring in the state actually grew at a healthy rate of between 8% and 15% annually. And the gross enrollment ratio is only 26.3%, which is on the lower end nationally.
So it's not an enrollment boom. The real structural issue is physical capacity. The state simply hasn't built enough colleges.
Institutions are bursting at the seams, with roughly 1,100 students packed into each one, resulting in a dismal pupil-teacher ratio of 29 to 35. It sounds like the gig economy is taking over the ivory tower,
It absolutely is, and temporary positions offer abysmal pay, zero job security, and essentially no room for academic research.
which degrades the overall quality of education for every student in that classroom. But wait, if they are hiring permanent teachers at a normal, healthy rate, why is the gap still so huge? Is the state just failing to lay enough bricks and mortar to build physical colleges for the population?
Precisely. If you only expand your physical institutional infrastructure by about 10% over several years, as West Bengal did, but the absolute population of students continues to grow, your existing infrastructure buckles.
Under the weight, right?
Yeah, temporary labor becomes a desperate Band-Aid coping mechanism for a severely strained system.
It's incredible how analyzing data like this helps uncover hidden populations, like these thousands of temporary workers operating in the shadows to keep the university system from collapsing.
Yeah, it's a hidden ecosystem.
And speaking of observing how populations adapt to strained, human-dominated environments, that leads us to a fascinating new study in Scientific Reports that has just mapped India's jungle cat population.
Ah, yes, the Felis cows. This study is groundbreaking because it utilized the largest data set ever compiled for this specific species in India.
And researchers estimate there are roughly 3 lakh jungle cats currently in India, right? With a statistical range of 1.57 to 4.59 lakh.
Yeah, and the way they got this data is just wild. They used bycatch data from 26,000 camera traps that were originally set up in the forests to track endangered tigers.
And it turns out these jungle cats don't even like the dense forests where the tigers live. They prefer agro-pastoral habitats like farms, open grasslands, and edges of villages.
They are mostly concentrated in the eastern parts of the country rather than the arid west. But because they live so intimately close to human settlements, they face highly specific threats.
Speeding vehicles on rural highways, obviously, but also a massive threat from stray dogs, which cause something scientists call kleptoparasitism.
Yes, kleptoparasitism. It's a biological term for essentially stealing food that another animal has already hunted and caught.
Kleptoparasitism. So basically, packs of stray dogs act like schoolyard bullies, waiting for the jungle cat to do the hard work of hunting and then stealing their lunch money.
Pretty much. It's a major survival pressure for them.
But here's my question. Since they are classified as a species of least concern by the IUCN, and they mostly just hang out near farms catching rodents, why do we need to dedicate state resources to studying and protecting them when highly endangered tigers desperately need our help?
That's a valid question. The answer is that ecosystems don't neatly stop at the artificially drawn borders of national parks. Jungle cats play a highly crucial economic role in agricultural areas by controlling rodent populations that would otherwise decimate crops.
Oh, that makes sense.
So protecting biodiversity outside traditional reserves requires proactive state policy. It means designing wildlife passageways across new rural highways and managing stray dog populations in villages, not just focusing all our resources inside tiger reserves.
It requires the state to actively manage the complex ecosystems surrounding its citizens. And that actually brings us to a very different kind of state policy, one that intends to regulate citizens' personal, spiritual ecosystems.
You're talking about the Maharashtra Freedom of Religion Bill 2026?
Yes, which was just passed, and it is sparking intense, polarized debate across the country.
On paper, the bill aims to prohibit unlawful religious conversions achieved through force, allurement, or fraud. But the legal mechanisms it introduces to enforce this are incredibly sweeping.
Yeah, if you wish to change your religion, the law now requires a mandatory 60-day prior notice submitted to the government. And the punishments for unlawful conversion are severe, up to 10 years in prison and a 7 lakh rupee fine.
And crucially, the net for who can report you is very wide. Complaints can be filed by any blood relative or relative by marriage.
Furthermore, any marriage solemnized solely for the purpose of unlawful conversion will be declared null and void by the courts.
Now, opponents and civil rights groups are deeply concerned about state surveillance here. They argue this will disproportionately target consensual interfaith marriages and empower vigilante groups to harass couples.
It really sounds like the state is demanding a bureaucratic permit for your own conscience.
That's a very real concern, and the administrative and bureaucratic burden is also massive. Consider the mechanics. Revenue officers, whose entire careers are built around managing land records and collecting taxes, will now be legally required to navigate complex, deeply sensitive personal law.
They have to determine the spiritual validity of a conversion. Wait, if the government claims they desperately need this law because they don't have effective tools to handle forced conversions, Why are senior bureaucrats themselves anonymously calling this an administrative nightmare?
Because there is currently no established standardized certification system for religions in the state. Creating an entirely new bureaucratic mechanism from scratch to judge the validity of a deeply personal spiritual choice creates profound friction.
No.
It's the ultimate example of the state intervening in deeply personal relationships without the infrastructure to manage it.
And from state intervention in personal domestic affairs, we need to zoom out, like way out, to look at state intervention in incredibly complex global affairs. There are fascinating high-stakes developments regarding Pakistan's role on the world stage right now.
Yes, Pakistan is currently emerging as the primary mediator for back-channel diplomatic talks between the United States and Iran.
Which is a surprising development, mostly propelled by U.S. President Donald Trump's strong personal rapport with Pakistan's military leader, General Asim Munir, and Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif.
For Iran, Pakistan serves as a viable, trustworthy mediator both because of their shared geographic borders and because Islamabad officially does not recognize the State of Israel.
What's incredible to me is that this isn't the first time Pakistan has played this exact back-channel role for Washington. If you look back to 1971, General Yahya Khan helped President Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger establish top-secret back-channel talks with China.
Yes, the famous trip.
That whole operation included Kissinger's famous ruse, where he faked having a severe case of Delhi belly during a diplomatic trip to Pakistan, just so he could disappear and secretly fly to Beijing on a commercial flight. It's extreme diplomatic déjà vu.
It really is a striking historical parallel, but we must also remember the incredibly grim human cost of that 1971 diplomacy. Because Nixon was so desperate to protect his secret diplomatic channel to China through Pakistan, the U.S. made a calculated geopolitical decision to turn a blind eye to the horrific atrocities being committed by Pakistani troops in East Pakistan, which is now Bangladesh.
Millions of civilians were killed, and the superpower looked away to protect a diplomatic asset. Looking at the tragic, bloody fallout of 1971, are we seeing history repeat itself today? Like, is there a risk that a superpower might intentionally ignore severe regional transgressions just to secure a massive geopolitical win with Iran?
Well, it's the persistent risk inherent in transactional geopolitics. Traditional history often focuses almost exclusively on these massive, high-stakes maneuvers by powerful men in closed rooms.
Prioritizing strategic global wins over localized human costs.
Exactly.
Which is exactly why we need to pivot and look at the grassroots level. There is an entire movement of literature and academia dedicated entirely to filling in the gaps of history that those powerful men leave behind. It's about women writing the gaps.
A perfect example of this is the Nobel laureate Annie Ernaux. She views her writing not just as storytelling, but as an act of historical excavation.
She explicitly stated her mission is to avenge my people, right? Documenting her working-class roots, the brutal realities of backstreet abortions, and the crushing weight of class struggle in France.
She realized early on that the recorded world was constructed by men and for men.
And we see this vital excavation happening in modern India, too. Look at Asia Islam's ethnographic work documenting the lives of lower-middle-class women in Delhi.
She tells the story of Sheila the barista, who is trapped in an endless cycle of low-wage service work because she lacks the funds for further education.
Or Jahnavi, the presswala's daughter, trying to navigate modern cafe culture. History isn't just written by the victors. For centuries, it was exclusively written by the men in the room.
And even the women who fought tooth and nail to enter the academic rooms where history is recorded faced incredible systemic barriers. The book, Women Writing History, details the lived experiences of eminent Indian historians.
Yeah, Kumkum Roy recalls how a highly respected guru explicitly refused to teach her Vedic Sanskrit simply because she was a woman.
She and others like Ramala Thapar talk about the everyday reality of systemic sexism, like having to use their heavy, book-filled shoulder bags as physical shields against harassment on Delhi buses just to get to their university libraries.
It's awful. Historian Preeti Gulati mentions in her work that she subconsciously refuses to put gender at the forefront of her research to avoid losing her mind. Isn't it incredibly ironic and a bit tragic that a female historian feels she has to actively sidestep gender just to survive and be taken seriously in her field?
It speaks to the enduring, exhausting struggle of women fighting for their rightful place in the narrative. They aren't just doing the work of historians. They are constantly navigating and fighting against structures built specifically to exclude them.
And that concept, the exhausting multi-year fight for rightful recognition, links directly to a literal physical fight for rightful dues happening right now on the streets of West Bengal. We're talking about a grueling 11,155-day continuous protest.
The Sangrami Jutho Mancha, which represents various government employee associations, has been physically camped out at Sahid Minar in Kolkata. They are demanding their dearness allowance, or DA, arrears.
For those who might not know, DA is a cost of living adjustment calculated against inflation. It is crucially important to understand that DA is not a performance bonus or a state gift. It is a legally enforceable right designed to help employees simply survive rising prices.
And the disparity causing this protest is wild. West Bengal state employees currently receive 22% DA, while central government employees working in the exact same economy get around 58%.
The Supreme Court of India even intervened and ordered the state to pay the outstanding arrears by March 31st. But just before the recent elections, the state government offered only a fraction of those arrears to be paid out in delayed installments.
Meanwhile, the protesters are facing severe state backlash, like suspensions and punitive job transfers.
It's a multi-year relay race of resistance. They use a strict spreadsheet roster just to make sure people are rotating shifts, keeping the protest tent occupied 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
They are literally surviving on voluntary donations sent via a QR code taped to the tent.
It requires immense organized dedication. But the core issue driving these everyday people to sleep on the street for over 3 years is the crushing, inescapable weight of inflation.
They simply cannot afford to survive, feed their families, or pay rent on pre-inflation wages.
If the Supreme Court explicitly ordered this to be paid, how can a state government simply delay it or offer a tiny fraction right before an election? How does the math of daily survival work for these people while the state plays legal games?
Well, governments often cite fiscal constraints and budget deficits to justify the delay. But for the workers, as you said, the math of daily survival doesn't pause for state budgets. Inflation erodes their purchasing reality every single time they go to the market.
And if you want to see the most visceral, terrifying, real-world consequence of that inflation, you just have to look at the housing crisis in Chennai right now. The rental market there is operating at an absolute boiling point.
We are seeing average annual rent increases of 11 to 14% across the board. But in some specific pockets, landlords have aggressively revalued their properties by up to 30% in a single year, attempting to make up for the stagnation they experienced during the pandemic.
Finding a flat in Chennai right now sounds like a cruel game of musical chairs. But every time the music stops, the entry fee just to sit down goes up.
That's a really accurate way to picture it.
And it's not just the city center, even in the suburbs. A standard 3 BHK in Pore is hitting 55,000 rupees a month.
The rapid expansion of the metro rail is pushing rents up by 5,000 rupees almost overnight in areas like North Chennai because suddenly those areas are connected.
Plus, the city corporations have recently doubled property tax collections and water taxes are up, so landlords are just passing those operating costs directly to the tenants.
There are major structural zoning issues at play here too. Chennai has strict floor space index, or FSI, limits.
Right, which restricts how tall developers can build residential buildings compared to cities like Mumbai or Bengaluru.
Exactly. When a severe lack of vertical housing supply meets a massive post-pandemic return to office demand, prices explode.
Landlords are publicly claiming that earning capacity is higher now, so tenants can afford it. But if that's true, why are tenants feeling so incredibly squeezed? Is this a genuine mathematical market correction or just opportunistic price gouging? Because landlords know people have nowhere else to go.
It is definitely a combination of both. The market is technically correcting for the pandemic pause, but the acute lack of vertical development, combined with rapid infrastructure growth like the metro, creates localized monopolies.
Right.
It allows landlords to command premium prices that far, far outpace average wage growth.
If the current rental trajectory continues, what happens when the essential workers, the very people keeping a city running, get completely priced out of the market? Will we see our major hubs hollowed out from the inside, leaving only those who can afford the premium? It's something for you to ponder. Thank you for listening. If you want to provide suggestions, please contact on the Twitter handle given in the episode description. As always, we are eager to hear what our listeners want to be informed about. We wish you a great day.